Hello and welcome back to another episode of Mr. Grant's Too Long Didn't Watch. This time around we'll be talking about another film in the period of German Expressionism. This time a science fiction film called Metropolis by Fritz Lang. With its impressive sets and bold storytelling, Metropolis's influence on the genre of science fiction is ubiquitous. Films such as the Dark Knight series, Star Wars, and Blade Runner have each borrowed inspiration from the potent style and message present in this film. Without further ado, let's get into the history. As usual, the story of Metropolis begins well before its production. Despite its surreal sci-fi tone, this film is as grounded in history as any other. The year is 1918. Germany hangs its head in sorrow. Over 2 million of its men have perished in the gruesome and fruitless violence of the First World War. The nationalist cries and aspirations of the common German citizen have faded into woe and economic despair. Under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, Germany is left to shoulder the full cost of the war. The reparations will send Germany's currency into a tailspin, leading to hyperinflation. Families lost their savings, their jobs, their homes, prices outpaced wages, and average citizens faced poverty and hunger on a devastating scale. This economic hardship drove many to find solace and retribution on the far ends of the political spectrum, with extremist groups such as the National Socialist or Nazi Party. This rift escalated into violence and social upheaval, which would continue to erode the newly formed democratic government, the Weimar Republic, until its eventual collapse and reconstruction as a fascist state under Adolf Hitler. We cannot underestimate the role of the desperation and hardship suffered after World War I in the eventual rise of Nazism, and the heinous crimes committed during its 12-year reign in Germany. Misery and bitterness of a disillusioned middle class made up the crucible in which the vile prejudice of fascism was forged. However, during the Weimar period, not all were affected equally by these plights. Wartime profiteering had enriched many wealthy industrialists. With access to foreign currency and solid capital investments to fall back on, hyperinflation would be no major threat to the wealthy upper class of Germany. Even the taxes which financed Germany's reparation payments would land disproportionately on the working and middle classes who had no resources to mitigate these financial strains. The war had exacerbated the pre-existing wealth inequality. With Germany already late to the game of industrialization, its focus turned towards ramping up manufacturing and rebuilding its war-torn infrastructure. But with wages still declining and prices still rising, there was little question of who were the winners and losers in the race towards modernity. Now that we have set the stage, let's talk about the film, shall we? Metropolis, a city of the future, a place like no other. Like a bright, sparkling car parked in the corner of the used car lot, its visual grandeur is enough to distract you from the rust and dysfunction that lies within. Buried deep below the sprawling heights of the city walks the zombified workers. Confined to their underground stations, forced to trudge monotonously through the empty corridors between their work and what little life they can muster, it is a world deprived of color and inspiration, the color and inspiration that blossoms above. Masses of men moving uniformly towards their own exploitation at the will of the rapacious ruling class that towers above them. Far away from the bleak and empty squalor of the workers' world, we find Freder, son of Joe Fredersen, mastermind and leader of Metropolis's quasi-business/government. Freder spends his days in an indulgent and enlightened paradise called the Club of the Suns, named of course for its members, who are each the heir or descendants of the city's movers and shakers. The wealth and status of their fathers have shaped them into Vitruvian models of knowledge and physical excellence. All, of course, for their frivolity, entitlement, and incognizance of what dreadful exploitations are at the foundation of their opulent tastes and pampered lifestyle. One day, while Freder is wooing his choice of gorgeous women in the so-called Eternal Garden, His illusory outlook on the city is flipped upside down. Enter Maria, the working-class prophetess emerging from the sullen corridors of the workers' world to show a glimpse of the blissful utopia above to a group of children with whom she walks arm in arm. Maria is unlike any woman Freder has ever seen before. She is far from the glamorous women adorned with their stylish modern outfits, intricate accessories, and voguish makeup. Rather, Maria is comparatively plain, unadorned, even austere. On her face, we see no dramatic beautification, but rather a pallid look of one forlorn. Her hair looks traditional, her clothes look downright medieval, but her gaze seems to pierce the very heart of Freder as he looks on. Struck in awe with her simple and sincere beauty, her visage is made all the more profound by the tiny hands of children grasping at her for safety, for her nurturing presence. She utters to them simply, "Look, these are your brothers," making the extravagance of the sight before them look shameful and outrageous. Look at how the others live, their excess, their frivolity. Before Maria and the children are forcibly removed by the ushers of the club, it's clear that Freder is entranced by what he's just witnessed. He shoos the other women away, walking dazed towards the swinging doors that separate him from the glimpse of this new world. His search for the girl brings him to the heart of the workers' world, where he finds the heart machine, a raucous and imposing structure manned by countless workers to provide energy to the city. After a worker collapses from exhaustion, the machine experiences a catastrophic failure, bursting into a cloud of steam and smoke. From beneath this chaos, we see the machine transformed into some hideous biblical deity Malak. Seconds later, Freder gathers himself. The monstrous vision reappears as a normal machine, and the workers are replaced with a disturbing lack of concern for their well-being. Freder runs to alert his father Joe to the meltdown, and he is met with little concern. Joe instead expresses his dissatisfaction with his assistant Josephat for not alerting him sooner. When confronted by Freder about the horrific conditions for the city's workers, he is met with even more apathy, as his father expresses that the workers' lowly station is simply where they belong. Freder is stunned by his father's indifference towards the matter, but barely has time to react before Joe is brought even more troubling news by the chief foreman of the heart machine named Grot. It seems that some mysterious documents were found in the pockets of the victims of the machine's meltdown. Once again, Joe Fredersen turns his frustration towards his assistant Josephat, and he decides to give him the boot. Freder decides to follow Josephat out of his father's office, and stops him before he attempts to take his own life. Freder offers Josephat to come with him, letting him in on some sort of plan. Shortly after, Freder departs with Josephat and decides to trek once more into the workers' world underground. He stumbles on another worker suffering from exhaustion and decides to switch places with him for the night. Freder dons the worker's clothes and begins working on a machine station, while the other worker is sent off in his father's car with an address to follow. It's then that we see Joe Fredersen visiting a mysterious building in the center of Metropolis. He finds a massive statue of a woman's face. It's not just any woman, though. It's Hel, the late wife of Joe Fredersen and mother of Freder. The next room over, we find a mad scientist named Rotwang, tinkering with his latest experiments. When Rotwang finds Joe standing before the large statue, he is sent into a rage. It's then that we find that both Rotwang and Joe Fredersen had once competed for the heart of Hel before she was eventually won over by Joe and subsequently died during the birth of their son Freder. Neither man has really fully moved on from the loss, but Rotwang's grief seems to have had a more profound impact. He tells Joe of his plan to revive Hel in the form of a shape-shifting humanoid robot. Just to recap, so far in Metropolis, we have a troubling imbalance of power due to a gap in wealth, scientists playing God and treading dangerously to the edge of artificial intelligence, and with even the slightest trigger, the city's simmering social tensions would be primed to explode. Definitely nothing in here that would be at all relevant in a modern context. After exhibiting his creation, Rotwang learns that Joe has sought him out for help in uncovering what the mysterious documents recovered on the workers could mean. At the same time, we find Freder back in the workers' world, finding the very same document in the outfit he borrowed from the worker he swapped places with. Another worker alerts him that he can use the document to find his way to his secret meeting. The map brings all three men, Freder, Joe Fredersen, and Rotwing, into the city's catacombs. They find a gathering of workers. Freder, still wearing his new worker uniform, blends in well enough, but Joe Fredersen and Rotwing watch from a hole in the wall. Once there, we find that it was Maria who called the meeting of the workers. Maria goes on to tell the story of the Tower of Babel, how generations of men since ancient times have toiled fruitlessly to achieve the aspirations of those with power. She claims that the suffering workers' experience stems from a dysfunction between the minds of society and the hands of society. But she tells the workers to be patient, as she has prophesied that a mediator will one day come and create harmony between the workers and those with power. It's then that Maria finds Freder in the crowd, and without hesitation, she asks if he has come to be the mediator. He agrees and confesses his love for her. The two agree to meet again soon to discuss their plans to unite the city. However, elsewhere, Joe Fredersen tries to convince Rotwing to use his shape-shifting robot to assume the identity of Maria and use her to disband the workers of the secret society. Rotwing agrees, but with a sinister plot. He abducts Maria on his way out of the catacombs and brings her back to his laboratory. Later on, Freder walks the streets trying to find Maria after she fails to meet back up with him. We see Maria struggling to escape Rotwing's laboratory. She screams out of a window as Rotwing tries to subdue her for his experiment. Then Freder hears her. He bursts his way into the laboratory building. He finds a maze-like structure leading him to constant dead ends as he desperately searches for his love. Rotwing has finally strapped Maria into his contraption and begins the process of transferring her likeness to the robot. The procedure succeeds, and we see that his creation is now an identical replica of her. Finally, Freder finds his way to Rotwing. When he asks where Maria is, he tells her that she's left, and that she's with his father. The replica indeed has made its way to Joe Fredersen, where he commands that she enters the workers' world and sabotage the real Maria's work. Freder leaves to find his father, and when he enters his office, he sees Joe Fredersen with his hands clutching the replica. At once he falls to the ground and suffers a series of hallucinations as both exhaustion and confusion at the sight of the two embracing have overwhelmed him. This launches a montage of horrifying apocalyptic and religious imagery. We see the replicant Maria dancing ritualistically in front of a crowd of wealthy men, including Joe Fredersen and Rotwing. The men look on hypnotized by her beauty. We also see the statues of a Gothic cathedral come to life, led by the statue of Death, as he swings his scythe and Freder exclaims, "Death descends upon the city." You know, guys, I'm realizing that this is taking a really long time, so I'm just going to speed round the rest of this walkthrough. So here we go. Freder wakes up and his father's assistant Josephat explains that since he fell into a coma, all the most powerful men in town have fallen into a daze thanks to the hypnotic power of the robot version of Maria. They're all fighting, killing, and lusting over women, and it's made Joe Fredersen even more powerful. However, the working class citizens are growing more and more frustrated as they're still waiting for Maria's prophesied hero to come along, but instead all they're seeing is wealthy citizens acting like teenagers on spring break. Cut to Maria sitting in Rotwing's lab and listening to him ramble on while cringing in disgust. Rotwing basically tells her that Joe Fredersen wants to tempt the workers into rioting so he can put them down using force. However, Joe doesn't know that Freder is in love with Maria, a detail that Rotwing conveniently kept hidden. Rotwing's plan is to let Joe use the robot to cause chaos and watch Freder be torn to pieces by an angry mob trying to save Maria. Freder makes his way into the catacombs to find the replica of Maria giving a speech to the workers and convincing them to act violently. And Freder's all like, "Hey, you're not the real Maria." And the crowd's all like, "Wait, isn't that rich guy's son who we hate?" And then the crowd's all like, "Hey, kill him." But the worker that Freder switched places with earlier gets stabbed instead while trying to help Freder escape. Then cut back to Rotwing, who's just talked through his entire evil plan to get back at Joe Fredersen for stealing his boo. But oh wait, Joe Fredersen was outside the whole time and heard the entire thing and then comes in and starts beating the crap out of Rotwing while Maria escapes. Meanwhile, the replicant version of Maria is going crazy, telling the workers to destroy the heart machine, but the machine's chief engineer is like, "Bro, that will literally kill us," and they're too gassed up to really think that far ahead, so they destroy it anyways, and the result is that the entire underground city where they live and where their children live starts flooding. Maria, Freder, and Josephat all link up in the workers' world to save the imminently drowning children of the workers, while the workers themselves start to have that post-uprising clarity as soon as they realize that their children are probably sleeping with the fishes at home. Then the crowd of workers are all like, it's Maria's fault, she killed our kids, and it's totally not on us for not thinking what might happen if we destroy the most important machine in the city. So then they're all out in the streets looking for Maria, looking to throw hands, and finally they find the real Maria taking a break from saving abandoned children, and she's like, bro, what? I literally didn't do anything, but they don't know that, so chase breaks out and Maria finds a hiding spot in a cathedral down the road. Eventually, the angry mob of workers finds the replicant version of Maria partying with her rich friends, and they're like, we're about to go full Joan of Arc on this fool, so they tie her to a wooden stake and set her on fire. Freder finally catches up, and he thinks it's the real Maria, but the crowd won't let him save her. Then as the real Maria pops out to save Freder, she's surprised by Rotwang, who's just all kinds of crazy, and is convinced that she's the reincarnation of his long-lost girlfriend, and so another chase breaks out. Once the crowd realizes that the Maria is a robot and her human skin burns off, they let Freder go up and he runs to save Maria from Rotwang. Eventually, he knocks Rotwang off the roof. The crowd learns that Freder and Maria both saved their children, and Joe Fredersen is so shook by his son almost getting yeeted off a cathedral that he decides abusing the working class isn't really chill. Freder mediates the bond between the upper and working classes, and all is well that ends well. So what did we learn? Well, Lang is not exactly shy about his critique of modernity and inequality in this film. The same industrialization which evolved during the interwar period in Germany is shown as dehumanizing, degrading, and exploitative. The stark contrasts of the classes within Metropolis reflect the sentiment of many working and middle-class people of Weimar Germany who lamented the loss of their livelihoods. The historical developments during this time created a clear situation of winners and losers that is undeniably paralleled in Lang's head and hands metaphor. Lang creates a clear critique against authoritarian rule by painting the state capitalist enterprise of Metropolis as a prejudiced institution with no regard for human life. And yet he also critiques the vulnerability of the working class to appeals of fringe ideologies and extremism through the use of political and religious metaphors. Imagery such as the sacrifice of the workers to the deity Moloch or the Tower of Babel feed into a larger critique on modernity's tendency to separate people from their morality. Greed, corruption, and unchecked desire for power, false idols, and the ambition to play God with technology are at the heart of Metropolis's dysfunction. However, the desperate working and middle classes of Weimar Germany were less fortunate than to be saved by a messianic figure like those of Metropolis. Freder, the mediator who used his compassion to bridge the gap between the head and the hands, between the power of the capital and the power of the collective, represents Lang's longing for unity and equality among Germans. Unity and equality which would sadly not be found in the period that followed. In fact, the film was widely criticized after its release for supposed communist sympathies in its depiction of working-class struggle, and was subsequently censored for many audiences, including those in the United States. Combine that with a longer-than-usual runtime and its complicated metaphorical nature, it's easy to understand why Lang's message was overlooked for so many years. However, even today, this film provides us with fascinating insights and cautions that are still incredibly relevant. That's all for now. As always, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you learned something. In the words of Truman Burbank from The Truman Show, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.